So although Jim very simply and fully explained the theme and point of the epistle reading, I'm going to take some more time on that. First of all, I thought this was a funny cartoon. If you can't read it, it's a guy crying out to God and says, if you're out there, send a sign. Something simple, like have this lottery ticket I bought win, or maybe that girl Sue falls in love with me, or I find a pile of cash or something. Please, something simple like that to let me know you're there. God doesn't exist unless he gives us what we want, right? No. All right, so I want to talk about the epistle reading. And I know from my life that the topics of knowledge, wisdom, love, education, because that all gets in there, becomes a little bit of a hot button thing, not necessarily political, but simply because from almost the beginning of human existence, we have divided ourselves between those who know and those who don't. And knowledge, as Paul says, puffs us up. We think because we know more that we are better than people. Not everyone. It's good to be humble. So I want to explain a couple things, and then I want to give you my context, some personal context, so that you hear me properly and don't assume anything, and then we'll get into what happened in Corinth. The first thing I want to say is, as far as knowledge and wisdom and education, it is my experience that there may be, and in many cases, a vast difference between somebody being intelligent and someone being educated. So I start with my dad. Dropped out of school somewhere around 7th grade. Now, this was such an embarrassing thing to him to tell us kids. I don't remember learning that until I was in high school. Now, my dad was a machinist, and I chuckle now because this was a guy who always complained that he didn't like math. And if you know anything about being a machinist, you know that math, it's a core thing that you need to know in order to do that. And I want to tell you that despite dropping out at the 7th grade, my dad was one of the most intelligent people I ever met. Now, I know people with a lot of letters after their names, masters and doctorates, and I've also noticed that people who get doctorates, they always want to say, refer to me as doctor. It kind of puffs up a little bit. And I want to let you know that I've known people from college and seminary, people with a lot of letters in their name, and they're not really very smart. They are knowledgeable, some not even that. But some of them do the most, I'm going to say it, stupid things I've ever seen. So, I want you to understand that I honestly believe that there is no one-to-one, 100% correlation between being intelligent and being educated. Those are two different things, I believe. Now, at the same time, if you're saying, well, Pastor, don't you want us to go to school? Okay, so I am not bragging at all on this. I have 2 bachelors and a master's. My wife has a bachelor's and a master's, and I taught in schools for a year and a half. My wife has been a teacher in various schools for most of her adult life. We believe in education, okay? A good, solid education that gives you a good understanding of things. But my wife has a soapbox item that she has, and I completely agree with her on this. She has this saying. She says, it's not how smart are you, it's how are you smart. I want to say that again because sometimes when you kind of repeat yourself and move words around, you don't catch it. It's not how smart you are, which is usually how we gauge each other, right? Well, what was the highest level of education did you go? Or what was your IQ tested at? And how many honor rolls? It's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, how are you smart? Everyone is good at least something. Okay? And it is that we should focus on and match people up, which is also why Becky and I are also big supporters of not everyone going to college, because we don't believe everyone has the gifts and talents to go to college. They have trade schools. You know, I don't understand. I grew up in a blue-collar, bless you, household, so I've never understood people who put down trade people. It's ridiculous. Do you know how smart they are? And by the way, here's another way about how are you smart. Do you know how to fix an air conditioner? Can you fix your car all by yourself? No. We call these people we put down as idiots. Does that make any sense to you? You know? Oh my goodness. You know, if all the plumbers and electricians and HVAC people were to suddenly stop working, we would be hurting, wouldn't we? It's not how smart are you. Wrong question. By the way, IQ tests don't really even get at this. It's how are you smart? And I think the sooner we start understanding that and accepting that there's different paths for people to go on, college is one, trades are another, other issues, I think will be better. And we don't say one is better than the other. All right, that's the soapbox. So I just wanted you to understand where I stood about knowledge and wisdom and education, because I'm going to be bad-mouthing knowledge a little bit today, okay? So I want to start off with a saying that helps illustrate to me what the difference is between knowledge and wisdom. You might have heard this before. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Somebody said once that wisdom is the right application of knowledge. Are you with me on that? Knowledge is just facts. Necessary, but sometimes trivial. You know, growing up through college in the 80s, and anyone who lived through the 80s may remember that there was a table game that was a huge hit, Trivial Pursuit. I know it still exists, but I don't think it's as big as it was in the 80s. And oh my goodness, if you play Trivial Pursuit with people, you may have seen that how cutthroat that gets. But at the end of the day, the knowledge, for the most part, is what? Trivial. It's a collection of facts. It's interesting. It's fun, you know. Who won the best Oscar in 1939? Gone with the Wind. What does that get me? I don't know. You know, should have been Wizard of Oz. That's a whole other conversation. But knowledge is necessary. We need to know the facts to do our jobs, right? But not if we don't have an understanding of the proper application of that fact, then we're not wise. And it's really wisdom we should be looking for. So, with that in mind, let us talk about the Corinth situation. All right, Corinth is a large city at the time. It's a trade city. So that means there's all kinds of different influences coming through from different cultures and different countries. And as such, it is full, like a lot of Roman cities were at the time, of different types of churches, temples, to all kinds of pagan gods. They were very proud of that. Now, if you worship the pagan god, meaning not the Christian and Jewish God, and you were a butcher, you would get up in the morning and you would take your animals out to be sacrificed, and you would purposefully sacrifice it to your idol, whatever pagan god you believed in. And then you would butcher it and cure it and whatever and sell it in the marketplace. With me? So, with the rise of Christianity in Corinth, oh, and one more thing to understand, and sometimes we forget this. for most of the people we meet in the New Testament, they are first-generation Christians. A little hard for us to understand because I know some of you come from families that worshiped here in St. Paul's for a long time. Your children worship, maybe not here, but somewhere else, and you're part of a family that has been Christian for many, many, many years. Not so here. And so a lot of them were older adults who are 1 to 2 years new into their faith, just like everyone else, which means they grew up their entire life in Corinth believing in false gods, in idols. So when they converted to Christianity, human nature is such, is it not, that something that was a habit for so very long is sometimes hard to kick. So a problem arose in the Corinth church, which is like saying the sun rises in the east. It just is. So this particular problem was that some people in the Corinth church, they started to feel very uncomfortable buying and eating meat at the marketplace that had been sacrificed to idols. It disturbed them. It gave them doubts about their own faith. Okay? Don't think too much about that. Just understand it is. On the other hand, there were others in the Corinth church who knew, and they were right to know this, that there is no such thing as a false god. There is only one God. There's nothing else. So if you're sacrificing your meat, the meat to Baal, you're sacrificing it to nothing. It signifies nothing. And so they eat the meat with no qualms at all. I also imagine, though unstated in the Bible, that these people we know that they were sharing food, because Paul yells at them about people eating and partaking of the Lord's Supper in an unfaithful, bad way. And really what that meant was, at that time, it wasn't just a little piece of bread and a little bit of juice. They were sharing a table, full-out dinner table. And the people who didn't work, the rich people, would come early, and they would eat everything. And so the poorer people came, and there was nothing there. So I think it's easy to imagine that some of the food brought by some of the people was some of the meat that was sacrificed to idols. And I can also imagine that it had to cause friction within the church for it to get to Paul, and Paul writing a lot about it. So I can imagine some of the people with their superior, and again, I need to admit, we need to state correct knowledge, kind of laughing at these people. What's your problem, dude? You can eat this. It's not a problem because there's no idols. You're an idiot if you think there's idols. Something like that. Sounds like a church, right? And so now there's a problem. So Paul writes to them. And what he says is really incredible. And it is challenging for us even to this day. What he says is, first of all, he admits the people are right. Sacrificing food to idols is not an issue for a real Christian. Not an issue. Because there are no other gods. You can eat it if you want. Doesn't do anything. Then, this is the thing. He says, however, if we use our knowledge as a weapon to hurt other people, which is really what they're doing, and it causes them, this is the big thing for Paul, if it causes them to stumble in their faith walk, then you don't do it. And in the end, Paul says something it seems like he's being ridiculously large, but I'm sure he absolutely meant it. He said, if by eating this meat causes someone to lose their faith and stumble in their walk with Christ, I will not eat it. Although I am free to eat it, and it does not affect my faith. If what I do affects someone else's faith, I'm not going to do it. Now that is challenging, amen? Now, this is stuff I really love because this is pragmatic, lived out, so what, living as a Christian. What does our theology mean? Now, obviously, we don't have issues with meat being sacrificed to idols. So it's easy for us to take a step back and view it as a historical issue. But there are other issues still to this day. The big issue that comes to my mind that fits the general nature of this is the issue of alcohol, which is always a very interesting thing to bring up from the pulpit. But let's go through it carefully and fairly quickly. First, let's admit something. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you shouldn't drink alcohol. It's not there. What it does say is don't get drunk. Okay. However, and I'm talking to a bunch of adults, so you know this. What does drunk mean? How many drinks is and causes people to get drunk? I used to like to watch the TV show Cops, and I swear everyone who was drinking only ever had one beer. I'm sorry, officer, but I only had one beer. You know, 6'4", 200-pound guy, how many beers does it take to get him drunk versus a 5'4", 90-pound woman? What about an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic? How many drinks can a recovering alcoholic have? 0. How do we do this? And this is one where no matter how many times I preach it and how careful I am, I still have somebody who will come up to me after the service and go, Pastor, I just think no one should drink. With a little anger that I said this. But see, I think this issue fits, don't you? What if you invite some friends over? Friends from the church, you know, are Christians. But you don't know that maybe one of them is a recovering alcoholic. Or people are somebody's struggling with, can I drink alcohol and be a Christian? You know, and then you pull out the 6-pack. Oh, now we're here, aren't we? Will my drinking, of which I'm free to do because the Bible does not say not to do it, what if my drinking causes that other person, especially that recovering alcoholic, to then stop on the way home at the state store and fall off the wagon? Ow, right? That's what we want to struggle with. And this is not an easy thing, right? And there's definitely something about alcohol in America, right? This afternoon, when I watch the Ravens hopefully beat the Chiefs, I'm going to be inundated with beer commercials, right? Making it seem, by the way, like the only way to have an adult conversation with anyone is with alcohol, right? And so even insinuating that maybe we shouldn't drink, ooh, that will get people angry too. By the way, this is the history of the Methodist Church. Methodist Church was very much against drinking. Why? Because the Methodist Church was one of the major churches that went with America as it spread west. And as America spread westward, the bars, there's always a bar somewhere, and the people of the Methodist Church, the women, the wives, they saw the effects of alcoholism on their husbands. They lived it. They had the physical scars from their husband being alcoholics. And so they decided that the best thing is, it would be best if nobody ever drank. I'm not asking you to agree with that. I'm asking you to understand where it came from. And so when abolition came up, not abolition, good Chris, prohibition, and I'm trying to remember what it was called before it actually became prohibition. There was a movement. Temperance, thank you. Guess who led the temperance movement? The Methodist Church. Because they had been there. Which is why, for the longest time in the Methodist Book of Discipline, it said you should not drink. Because laws, when you make laws, you're going to have to say, if you say it's okay to drink but not get drunk, how do you write that? Okay. But do you see? Because it comes back to one major thing. If someone is struggling with alcohol in their life, and they see you drinking it as a Christian, and so they think that that's okay for them to do, and it causes them to stumble. I know the American thing to do is to say, hey, that's on them. Paul says, that's on me. That's on me. And if my drinking alcohol, Paul would say, caused anyone to stumble, I won't drink. So you see, it's not just a foreign concept, right? My commentary puts it this way. First of all, with his submission, which we can, I think, easily admit, what is safe for one person may be quite unsafe for another. Something may be no temptation whatever to us, but it may be a violent temptation to someone else. You do realize that we're all tempted by different things, right? And I firmly believe there is one temptation for each of us that pulls us the hardest, and we need to be the strongest at. Some of you may be able to walk into a casino, put a couple of quarters in a slot machine, and walk right out. You know there's others who can't do that, right? Also, nothing ought to be judged solely from the point of view of knowledge. Everything ought to be judged from the point of view of love. Do you love them? Do you love others? There is freedom that is given, but if our freedom negatively impacts someone else as a Christian, then we ought not to do that. I've heard it said this way about, in America we like to talk about our rights, right? I have a right to do that. And I heard somebody say, just because you have a right to do that doesn't make it the right thing to do. I think we're talking about responsibility for our actions, don't you think? What are we doing? And to understand that, especially as a Christian, we're not just this silo. We influence our family, our friends, and anyone who knows that we are a Christian. People are looking to us and saying, what does a Christian do? What does a Christian act like? I've told you the joke about the lady gets pulled over by a police officer in her car. And he takes a little while to check everything out, and finally he comes up to their window, knocks on it, and he says, well, I want to apologize, ma'am. She says, what for? He says, well, see, I was following you, and I saw you honking the horn and giving the one-finger salute and, shouting out the window, curse words to other drivers. And then I saw on the back of your car a bumper sticker about your church and a little fish symbol. So I just assumed you had stolen the car. Knowledge is important. Right application of knowledge, wisdom, is even more important. But all of that needs to be leavened with love and grace toward others. Bible says nothing about drinking. Bible said nothing against eating the meat. But Paul knew that by doing so, he hurt other people. And instead of doing the human thing and saying, dude, that's on you, he says, you know what? I'm not going to be the cause for your stumble because I love you and I love Christ. Love and wisdom are our Christian traits to live up to and to look and help other people in their faith walk. Amen.